After a long time.
It's been a very long time. So I guess we'll start by explaining ourselves to the scores of people who listen to us. So we were recording episodes going through the cell molecular stuff, metabolism, biochem stuff to do with the MCAT. We got into psychology. You dove into psychology. Paid off in the end. We'll talk about that in a second. But then we stopped. We got so heavy into MCAT studying right at the very end that we couldn't even work in our schedules, like time to keep recording.
No, we couldn't spare, a couple hours at a time to sit down and focus on that.
Yeah. And we were right. As we were saying, like, this was almost kind of an experiment to see, could the pressure almost of having to do a public podcast type content creation, could that like force us to learn things better?
Yeah.
I think it did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But when you gotta study psych for an hour and then you immediately have to go study something else, like you don't have another hour to record stuff, and so it was unfortunate. I think if we did it again, we could have made it work a lot better.
Yeah, and that's something that you learn with the MCAT too. When they say start studying early, they don't necessarily mean that you need 6 months to learn the material or learn how to handle the questions, but it's almost like you need to have a large amount of time to learn what works for you and what absolutely doesn't.
Yeah.
And then problem solve and then kind of figure out what works and have all of the material down, because what works for you in one subject does not necessarily work for you for others.
Yeah. I know I went to, what was it, MD Hero? That was awesome. And that worked for me for a lot of stuff. I don't think that it didn't work for like physics stuff and for the mathematics and even some of the Gen Chem, mainly because like I needed it to strip down even further to just like give me formulas. And I didn't need the explanation. Even at MD Hero, like strips it down a lot. We went to the AAMC's like official guidelines. That's where we started with our psych stuff, and Khan Academy was great. Had tons of practice problems. The explanations on Khan Academy were phenomenal.
Right.
To explain why, why was your thinking right or wrong. But like you said, it really was, we needed so much time to figure out like what actually is right for us.
Yeah.
And when you have like people from every single corner of the pre-med world telling you, oh no, you're not going to get a good grade unless you do X, Y, and Z, and in the throes of it, you believe them.
Yeah.
It's hard to turn their advice away, and you feel like you've been doing it wrong the whole time.
There's almost too many avenues to get information.
Really. And some of those avenues suck you into paying a lot of money.
Right. There was a cars class that someone took just for cars that was like $2,000.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I can't imagine spending that much, but I think it at least gave them some confidence. Whether or not it worked for their scores, I'm not sure, but
yeah.
So do we want to go through the sections and kind of talk about either what we did for the sections or and then eventually we'll get into how our MCAT day went.
Yeah, I'd like to. So let's start with the easy one, biochem.
Yeah, the easy one, our favorite.
So yeah, we are both biologists, and so biochem, I'm sure most people could probably resonate with this in the pre-med world, that most of us are biology or biochemistry, and that would come the most naturally to us. So you have to approach it in that way where you're not going so heavy on like content learning.
Right, because that basically should have been your undergrad.
Yeah. And you have to trust yourself. I mean, if you're someone who's done well enough that you've gotten to this point, you've probably gotten A's in all your prereq classes, you've done well enough, trust yourself that information is in your mind and review it. And, if some things don't make total sense to you, like this is where you're learning how to study like a med student. You got to read it and trust yourself. If you know it, if you don't know it, doesn't matter. You didn't have time.
No, and the overall thing is, I think, overall basic trends or being able to read a passage of information and pick out the things that are most important to answer questions. So learning all the nitty-gritty details, like some of those prep companies, they give you those books on entire sections, like one book on biology, one book on biochemistry. there's no way you could possibly learn all of what is inside both of those books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I guess we'll stick with the sections, but like going through the books that we had, like for biochem kind of stuff, it would be good if you have time and you can read through the whole book. Read through it once, and as you're going through it, maybe like just Google some terms that you're not familiar with, or it's been a while, or you need to. I know for me, mitosis and meiosis just does not sit in my head well, so I had to really stick to that. But like, don't, if someone says like you need to go through the books 3 times, you need to answer all the questions, just don't do it.
No, and this is coming from, we did really well in our undergrad, and Kevin has a master's in a pretty tough, hard science field. And we were missing like 14 out of the 15 questions in specific sections in the biology book.
Mm-hmm.
What I will say is important is I never took like an immunology class, and then I got to my test and there was, I think, 2 passages on immunology.
Yeah.
So if there's a pretty big category of questions that you've not had that class before, that might be something that's worth taking, a week or 2 to nail down those basics.
Yeah.
Because I didn't even know like what a T cell was, what a B cell was, and that was on my MCAT.
Yeah. So now that we talked a little bit about our prep,
Yeah.
let's talk about the actual section, because in the MCAT, it was very interesting to me. It worked. It was like the practice tests gave me a really good idea of what to expect, and they really were reliable. But when it actually came down to the real test, I came away from the biochem section with a completely different view of how I should have prepared.
Yep.
And I know for me, one of like the number one thing I've told everybody since then who are taking the MCAT, I said, learn how to read Western blots.
Yep.
And just any kind of gels, any kind of assay. Like if you can do that, you can bypass like the whole section.
Yeah, and so biochem was obviously my favorite section, and it was on all of our practice tests, the one I enjoyed studying for the most and enjoyed taking the most. And then I worked in a biochemistry lab, so that was like my favorite stuff.
Yeah.
I got to the test, and on my actual test day, and actually cried after that section. Like tears down my face, was crying. I felt like there was no biochemistry. When I got there, I kind of fell apart. I was like, none of the stuff that I love is on here. I'm going to fail this. I'm going to have to take it again. I'm never going to get into medical school. And it started this spiral, actually, that lasted the entire rest of the test. But what it really came down to is what Kevin said is knowing those basics. So like when I got to the immunology passage, I think there was like a Western blot on it. And I was like, oh God, I don't know any of this, but I can read this chart and I can go from here. And even though I messed up all of my strategy, like when I took practice tests, I never let myself skip a question because there's a chance that when you're skipping through, you get to the next passage and you don't know that stuff either. And then you're just wasting time looking for something you know well enough. And then some of your self-esteem is brought into that and you don't feel good enough for any of it. And then you're just in a downward spiral.
Yeah.
So when I got to the actual test, I let myself skip questions, and I even skipped whole passages looking for something that I knew. And in the end, it all turned out all right. But yeah, knowing those basics and being able to come back to, okay, I need to calm down. I need to look at what I am able to interpret, which is going back to those Western blots, or finding a passage that I can anchor myself in and then go from there. You can save a potentially disastrous test day.
Yeah.
And they're expensive too, so you don't want to lose it on your test day.
Yeah. I think that sums up my experience pretty well too.
Yeah.
So what about Chem Phys?
Oh God.
Chem Phys, that seems to be more than anything else kind of like people's Achilles heel. And it really did come down to like if you knew the formula and you could just read the question, even being able to just look at the picture, because it's this, I mean, it's the same thing with like the biochem, like just being able to look at the picture, look at the data that they give you, being able to look at the pictures in the Chem Phys section, especially the physics portion, which and this is no joke. People say this all the time, but I think most pre-meds studying for the MCAT don't want to believe it. The actual hardcore physics is not that much.
Right.
And like, do not overstudy for that, people.
Or they tell you need to memorize like 50 equations.
Right.
Which I did.
Yeah. I remember us writing it all on this giant whiteboard over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you can do that, do it. It's only going to help you.
But memorizing them doesn't mean that you understand how to use them.
Right.
Yeah.
But we even got to the point, and I think this really showed in the psych-soc section, which we'll get to, but you get to a point where you can probably predict at least 50% of the questions that will be on the MCAT. Because they're going to test you on Bernoulli's. They're going to test you on kinetic whatever. They're going to test you on these things. And if you're taking practice tests and you see those patterns, trust those patterns, because they'll continue.
And, you know, this is even something that we've learned in our interviews. When you get to a question and you have no background, like maybe you're taking your prereqs, but you haven't finished physics yet, so you haven't learned this one principle, or you're coming to an OChem section and you hated organic and you don't understand it at all. You're going to understand something, and you're going to maybe be able to figure out what they're asking. And if you know the basic formula, then you can work with what you do know and the formula that you have and figure out what they're asking, even if you don't understand the overall big picture of whatever experiment they're describing or something. They like those kind of passages where they give you all of this information that doesn't matter at all, and they're really just asking you about Gibbs free energy or something simple from your general chemistry class.
Yeah. And that's actually what I was just about to say, that if I had to give someone like one tip for the chem phys section, I would say the chemistry and organic chemistry side is going to be more than 50% actually just a biochem question.
Yeah.
And then the physics side, more than 50% of them are just going to be like a biology question.
Yeah, it's pretty much always related to stuff that you know, so you can get there somehow.
And like you said, that they're going to try to trick you. They're going to try to throw in all this information. They'll say like the heart is a really classic like physics problem. They'll talk about some kind of pumping in the heart. And you'll think like, well, the heart is this really complex thing, and all the arteries and X, Y, and Z. But really, like, all they're trying to say is just like, think about it like it's a pump motor and there's a tube coming out of it.
Yep.
Now do the physics that belongs to that problem.
Or a pretty simple pressure thing, and you're trying to think about, maybe it's the lungs and all they're talking about is air coming in versus air going out. And you're like, okay, but I know like the pleura are in there and there's all these things complicating it. One caveat I guess I would say is we're talking about it like it takes a lot of practice. I knew at the end of the day that it was going to be something that I was going to struggle with. I knew from the beginning it would be my worst section. And I was expecting to do like almost fail that section kind of and have to make up for it with my other sections. And so I did memorize those formulas. I tried to memorize all of them. I don't think I knew how to use even half of them. And I think I psyched myself out right before the test by doing that. And when it came down to test day, I was not as prepared as I should have been at all. But I did decently on that section anyway, because I just was able to work from very basic knowledge of the very basic science principles from our undergrad background.
Yeah.
So don't go memorize 100 equations. Really do what Kevin said. Focus on maybe 10 of the most important ideas from physics. If you don't understand one of the major concepts, maybe go ask somebody about it, because there's a high chance it'll be on there. But don't panic if you come to a passage about it, because even in a passage, a lot of the questions within a passage are going to be discrete questions anyway.
Yeah.
They might be totally unrelated to Bernoulli's. They might just be asking you something super simple, and don't overthink it and miss a gimme.
Yeah, so speaking of that and psyching yourself out, Psych-Soc. Psych-Soc was a great example of like,
it was
where discrete questions were only supposed to be like 15 out of the 60 or
right in
or
between
59.
passages.
Yeah, but no, it was at least half were actually discrete questions just hidden in the big passage, the big text, the 5-question set.
Conflict theory.
Yeah, conflict. You're always gonna. This is where the trends really like exploded. And
Yeah.
full disclosure, I finished my Psych Soc section 43 minutes early.
He finished early enough to look over and see me crying in my seat.
I finished so early, and I freaked out because I thought, like, I've never done this before. I've never finished this early.
Yeah.
Like, it seemed easy to me when I was taking it, and I was like, that's not a good sign. That means that, like, I did so bad that it must have been, I must have done horrible.
Yeah. And I was so, well, I guess should I talk about my emotional journey through that day?
Go for it.
Or should we talk about the other section first, cars?
We'll dive into cars first.
Okay.
But so as far as Psych Soc goes, it's not a complicated story. It's learn all of those definitions, focus on those trends. If I could say one section to focus on the trends, it is Psych Soc, because I remember we had the conflict theory question. We had it in every single
practice test we ever took.
And it was always like the same kind of answer. And like, even like, I had like an image of a very specific person like protesting at like outside of like an Occupy Wall Street type thing. And I had that stuck in my head. So I knew as soon as I saw conflict theory, I was just like, okay, look for the answer that's the most like that person. Boom, got it.
Yeah.
And it worked every time.
Yeah, without fail almost too. It's you can really get the hang of the Psych Soc section, and many people do finish it early, like with a substantial amount of time. I'm the kind of person that checks over everything 12 times if I have time. Like, I will always walk out when they make us leave the test.
Oh, I dipped.
But Psych is one of those that you'll have enough time at the end to go through and debate on the ones you'll have a question on. There's probably 10 at the end that I was going back and forth between, because a lot of those answers sound similar, but if you can pick up on the diction and the slight differences between the adjectives they're using, there really is one correct answer that goes back to the definition of what they're asking.
Yeah. And it really could get tricky when some things are so similar, but because they used like an article differently, or they didn't include this one like timing or something, you can't say it was that guy versus that guy's theory.
Yeah.
So it is nitpicky. I mean, we won't sugarcoat it. It was tough, but if you can break through like the wall of seeing each of these as like an individual hard problem to solve, rather than just saying, I know all of my definitions, I know all of my theories, now I just have to look for the keywords to know which one to click.
And something we got in trouble, really quickly to finish this section, was when we were making those videos, to practice ourselves, I was going into so many different rabbit holes, like so deep into detail that we never needed to know.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we finish recording the rest of the Psych videos, we'll probably do a couple more of them. They will be nowhere near as in detail because they do not need to be.
Mm-hmm. So, guys, people, gang, don't worry about cars. Oh my God. I can't stress that enough. I was free. Cars was like, the way it was presented to me is like, this is your opportunity on the test to get the edge on everyone else that no one else is gonna. It's like an exponential curve, right? You have to do so much work, but then once you get to a certain point of work on cars, your score is just gonna fly up. Don't listen to them. Don't pay $2,000.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just read. You can't prep for it. I mean, like when people say you can get so good with like mapping out your cars thing, and there's a formula to cars.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there kind of is and there kind of isn't. You just do it enough to figure out how you do it, but then please don't waste time on cars.
Someone said that you need to do like one passage a day is pretty common advice that you hear. To be completely honest with you, I didn't practice cars a single time.
Oh God, no. I mean, even you just have to be able to read. Mm-hmm. And you'll see this on the practice test, and it's no different on the real test, that you'll have some passages that are relatively easy, a couple passages that might be related to science, might not be. They might be talking about a study or some kind of history, and then you're going to have like one or two that the wording is just mean.
Philosophy, or if it's a law passage even.
Yeah. They're going to be using huge words, tons of commas, really complex sentence structure, and literally all they're doing, and if this helps you to prepare for it, kind of, all they're doing is trying to trick you with wording.
Yep.
That's literally it. And some people, like, I had some people tell me, because initially I was just jumping to the questions first, and then I would look through the passage, and I had some people tell me, like, you're never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I strayed away from it. I tried outlining, and I tried going really slow through the passage, and I was running out of time. I wasn't answering the questions correctly. And then I figured out how to kind of, like, hybrid how I answered Cars.
Yep.
And I could kind of like look at some of the questions, and then I could read back through the passage, and I would kind of jump all over the passage. Sometimes I would read a passage backwards.
Sometimes he wouldn't even read them.
Yeah. Sometimes I would just flat out like answer. So I was maybe a bit of an oddball with Cars, but I think my story is still good that, like, don't let it phase you. Don't let anyone tell you there is a way to do Cars, because at the end of the day, you're reading and you're answering a question.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I kind of already admitted that I didn't ever practice for this other than practice exams. One caveat I would have for people is that they harp on timing is the most important thing. Don't ever mess up your Cars timing. You have X amount of minutes for every passage. Something else I never did in any of the sections was have a set number of minutes I had for each question, because to me that was way too much focus on doing the math and, oh my God, how much time do I have left? And Cars, it was an even bigger deal because I needed to understand a lot of information to make decisions on each of these questions. So if I only had 10 minutes to do that, I was panicking about time, and I never wanted to have that. It's kind of like when people say they're going to do a diet, but they can't think about it like a diet, because then it becomes about the fact that they're depriving themselves of this other thing. So it was a mindset thing. So I never focused on timing. But if that helps you, and the way you figure that out is with actual practice exams done as if you were taking the real thing. Yeah. That was super important. We would get to the library right when it opened. Or a room in the science building, and take it, 8 hours in a row, not talking at our breaks, because we felt like that was important to mimic how test day would be. Yeah. And take it exactly as if you were taking it at the testing center. Yeah. And so Cars had, it was like 90 minutes, right? Or 95, something like that. Yeah, I think you have a couple more minutes because it's a little bit longer. So I know for this was for every section that I did. Yeah, like the whole idea, and I tried this for a while, and this is once again why we say when people tell you have to study like 6 months in advance, you don't need that much time to do the content. Right. But it's, figuring these things out. I tried to do like question by question and like, do all the math to figure out exactly how much time can I spend on each question or whatever. And it freaked me out, and I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate on the actual question. So for me, what ended up working just naturally was I split it up into thirds. Yeah. And I just made sure that I was about a third of the way through when about a third of the time was done, and then two thirds, that thing. And it always ended up working really well. Yeah. And so, whatever your amount of time is, even if it's no time management at all, it helped me at least, and maybe this will help other people, to kind of give myself a little bit more of a gray area as far as where I was. Exactly. Because for me, it was like, it's about a third of the way through, and I'm about a third of the way through of my questions. So that really relieved a lot of stress for me, and it kept me on task rather than thinking about like, I've got 5.5 minutes to do this, and I've already spent 2 minutes reading the passage. Oh no. And gosh, then that could start a spiral. Oh yeah. So I think I did about halfway. So what Kevin's saying about giving yourself a little bit of an ambiguous time restraint, or just glancing at the clock is how I would say it. Just glance. Right. So going back to taking the practice test as if it was the real test day. One thing that we found was actually really important and actually ended up affecting me on real test day. I think we can go there now. Yeah, let's do it. Make sure you're going to bed early the night before, especially if you're going to start early in the morning. Make sure you are eating the same thing. I know it sounds silly. Know, how much water you have with you. And,
Oh, gosh.
Because if you have to pee the whole time through your test,
Water
that's going
and
to affect
coffee.
how you're thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your caffeine intake going to be before you start the test? Are you going to eat something so you don't have the jitters when you're starting?
It's a science.
Yeah.
You're a professional student, a professional test taker. That's the world that you're all going into in medical school. So embrace it.
And I think they say that we should take about an average of, I think it was 10 practice tests about. And
I think we hit that, right?
we
We're
were
close to
about
it.
8,
Okay,
I
yeah.
think, and like 1/2 length.
Oh, yeah.
But, Next Step Test Prep has a free half-length diagnostic. They have a free full length. And then we paid for a test prep company. We won't name which one, but they're one of the major ones. I think it was 3 or 4 tests from them. They were very not accurate to how the AAMC scores the MCAT, but they were essential in learning that, hey, we need to take this seriously.
Yeah.
And hey, this is how you sit there for an 8-hour test. So they really were essential to your kind of training to take this, even though they didn't really represent how the AAMC asked questions. So obviously when they come out with more than 3 tests, only focus on the AAMC tests, but maybe use another test prep company just to learn how to do it.
Yeah, and really, you cannot, you can't overstate how important it is to be used to sitting there for 8 hours.
Yeah.
It became like second nature. Like the first time we did it, I was kind of excited. By the end of it, I was like, "There's no way I'm doing that again."
I would like to poke my eyeball out with a pencil.
And then when we came in for the second one, I was like terrified at the thought of like, I have to do that again. And then I did it, and it wasn't as bad. And at the end of it, it was just like, okay, we're just doing another test. Like, should we do another one tomorrow? Yes, no. Like, okay.
And you wouldn't
could.
have fun with it, but you train your brain and your body.
Yeah,
to
you really
sit
do.
there. And I did yoga in my breaks in the testing center. I mean, I got up in lotus. And people were laughing at me, but for me, it was what I needed to calm down a minute, because from the very beginning of my test day, it was a very bad day. Should I go into a little bit?
Yeah, let's
of
dive
it?
into it from 6 a.m.
Okay. So I kind of had been playing with diet. I knew I couldn't drink water because I knew I would have to go tinkle throughout the test. And I knew I couldn't have coffee before I started, or I would also have to go. And
Yeah.
but I knew I needed some kind of caffeine because we got up at like 4:30 or something that morning.
Right.
And we had done that previously for our other practice tests, so we were used to it, but we knew we needed caffeine. And you have a locker where you can put it in. So our last practice test, I had an energy drink and banana, peanut butter, and something else. Oh, like a little protein bar with like chocolate in it. It was one of those little, what are they, Captain? It was like an oat one.
Captain Crunch.
I don't know.
It was Captain Crunch.
It was like a cereal bar. But I had practiced that, and I thought I had it all down. I had taken sips of this energy drink during our breaks, and I was eating my banana and peanut butter, and I thought maybe that would keep me from getting the jitters. And for that one practice test, which was the only time I actually practiced it, it was fine. When I got to test day, coupled with the fact that I probably didn't sleep great because I was so worried because we were going to take the big MCAT the next day, drinking that energy drink at the beginning, I think gave me a lot of jitters. And so I sat there, and Chem Phys hit me like a freight train. And then I was like, oh, but that's okay. I can make up for it in biochem, which is my favorite section. Got there, and I already explained that I didn't feel like there was a lot of biochem on it, and I started spiraling then. And by that time, my palms were sweating, and my heart was racing. And then was cars right after our lunch break. After our lunch break, I physically started actually sweating through my sweater, and they had told us to bring layers in case it gets warm in the testing room, because there's like 20 of you ish in the testing room.
Yeah.
but I didn't think I could stop my cars section in order to take off the sweater because you have to leave the room and go hang it up and then come back in. So I was like physically sweating and very upset, and I had cried after biochem. And then I get to the psych section and I'm in tatters, like I'm emotionally in tatters. And I think I had finally taken off my sweater by that point, and I was still continuing to sip on my energy drink because I needed something.
Right.
And it was, I needed some caffeine to stay, awake during this 8-hour test. But it just, the spiral started from Chem Phys and just did not stop the whole time. And my very last question of the test, I knew I got wrong, but I left plenty of time to come back to it, but I was so distraught by the end of it, I didn't even go back and fix that last question. I had already raised my hand for I'm done because I think I was going to have a breakdown.
Mine was okay.
Yeah, no, it was the worst practice test. And the very last one we did, I felt great.
Yeah.
So that I think that just goes to show you need to practice exactly what you're going to do more than one time.
Yeah. Well, so my journey through the actual MCAT was very calm. I had some things where I felt like, crap, this isn't going well. This is going to be bad. But it didn't hit me as hard. I think, so I know when you take caffeine and you've got the jitters, that can go one of two ways. It can either go for let's get work done, let's be productive, let's take this test, or it can help to fuel anxiety.
And when your medical future's on the line,
yeah, it gets really dicey.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but that's like you said, you need to practice it. You need to practice not letting, because I mean, I won't say it sucks to hear this, but like taking caffeine is like child's play compared to a lot of other pre-meds taking the MCAT.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't Adderall. A lot of them are taking Vyvanse and all kinds of stuff. Like,
imagine what I would have done if I was on a drug.
Holy crap.
Well, caffeine is a drug, but
amphetamine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so you can totally do it naturally, I guess you would say, but I won't lie and say that no one else is doing that, because everybody is taking performance enhancing drugs, kind of,
if you
to do
consider
the MCAT.
caffeine especially.
Yeah. So if you're doing that, you want to make sure that you know exactly how you're going to react to it. You need to train yourself to not, don't let the caffeine fuel anxiety. Train yourself to catch that and then say, okay, I know that I could go down that road, but I'm just going to keep focusing on the productive side. And, it is a drug, so you got to treat it like that, and you got to be very careful with it, and be direct with it, be like a doctor would be.
Yeah. And so at the very end of taking this test, and I'm sure you guys know if you're on this path, you have the choice to void it or score your exam. And I think they count on a certain percentage of us feeling so almost crappy and scared that we void our test. And then we go back and take it again because we're like, there's no way I did well. And if I were to have listened to my body and my brain, there is no way I thought I did well. But I hit score before I even knew what I was doing.
Me too.
And I think it was the best decision I've ever made.
It was.
Because if I had voided that score, I would have, should we just talk about how we did? I would have voided a 91st percentile MCAT score.
Yep.
And that score has really helped me in this application cycle. Not to say I wouldn't have done okay and or better if I had waited, but just because I had no confidence in myself and was in an anxiety spiral does not mean I didn't do well.
Yeah.
So it's odd. I
think when we were even talking about this earlier, that a lot of what we had to do going through the cycle, and we sound like we're over paranoid, and if you aren't like this, really good for you. Don't think you have to be, but we know that a lot of people are like this, and you gotta trust yourself. You've gotta just believe that it's out of your control. You've done everything, especially if you really have done everything you can do. Don't think that there's anything more that you can. You gotta just trust yourself. You gotta go out on a limb and really leave it up to fate at that point. I know for me going through that day, and this is what happened in every test, while I was taking the test, during breaks, afterwards, before, I just had to try to be silly.
Yeah.
It's like when people start getting really talkative when they're nervous.
Yeah.
That's what I did. I had to be silly. I had to try to act like it wasn't a big deal.
And the other people at the testing center, it's kind of similar to interviews, will be doing the same thing. And,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's really nervous. Some people are probably taking their DATs. There's some people taking their Ts for nursing. But if you're nervous and you're talking, chances are someone else is. And as long as you're not talking about your test, the administrators, what do you call them? Like the proctors?
Proctors, yeah, that's it.
They don't really care. You know, they're listening to you, but if you're talking about like, yeah, there's a Braves game, you know, and I'm going to go to that, and you just can't stop yourself because you need to do that to feel better. Absolutely. If you need to do yoga, do yoga. You don't have that much time. But I cannot stress enough, do not let your anxiety take over. At no point in time is your test a lost cause, unless you let that anxiety take over and you skip maybe 2 passages. And if you skip 2 whole passages, or you know you didn't answer like 20 questions in a section, and that's like roughly what, a third or half of the questions,
Yeah.
I would say at that point in time, maybe it's okay to void at the end.
Yeah.
If that's not, or maybe that's the best that you can do, but if that really isn't an accurate representation of, you know, you finishing the questions, if you normally don't, I guess that's fine. But for most people, you can finish all the questions. You've practiced enough to learn how to do that. So if you miss that many, or maybe you ate something that morning and you're throwing up, I would definitely void it then. But I heard a MCAT expert one time say that there's never an excuse to void it unless you missed, you know, that many questions or you're physically ill. And that is the reason I scored my exam.
Yeah, I would put it, if I had to say it in like one sentence, I would say, don't void if you're just second guessing yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Because there were many times during the test when I was kind of second guessing myself, but I never went back on what I did. I guess you shared yours. I got an 86th percentile, and there were a lot of times where I was kind of second guessing. I was thinking like, should I put that? And I just went with it because that's what I had done every other time. And even if I felt kind of bad about it, I mean, there's nothing you can do. If it's what you think it is, then if you switch your answer, then you'll just be thinking, well, what if it was my original answer? And you have to go with your gut. You have to do your absolute best, make a decision, move on.
And Kevin stuck with what he did every time for practice tests. And, you know, even preparing for the MCAT, he was still doing his master's at the time. And he was also ramping up. He was about to graduate and present his thesis. And he had
a week and a half after the MCAT.
Yeah, he had no time to prepare. And he actually jumped, 6 points?
So that's good. So your top score was your top score from a practice exam, one of them?
No, my highest practice exam was like a 516.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know what the percentage is, maybe 1 point higher or something like that, 1 or 2 points higher.
Like a 92 or 3 or something.
Yeah. And then my test day was 514. But, you know, I considered that a win because I had such a mental breakdown while I was taking the test that there was no way I was going to take it again. That was a pretty accurate representation of me doing my best.
And then for me, my diagnostic was at a 503. I think we talked about that before. And I got like a 506, and then like a 507, then a 507, then a 508, then a 507, then a 507. And I was right there. And some people say you're going to jump a lot when you take the real test. And I was open to believing that, but I really thought I mean, I'm consistently getting 507, 508. I didn't think there was any way I could jump. It might have just been luck of the draw. I might have been very lucky to get a test that just hit my strong points. It might have been easier that day. I mean, there's really no way to know. But once again, that's where you just leave it up to fate. You gotta trust that whatever you're doing, if you've prepared enough. And I knew that I had, even though I wasn't totally psyched about the scores that I was getting on all the practice tests, I had to just believe that, you know, I've done everything I could do. And then I went and I got a 512. Jumped up a lot.
I think that speaks to keeping your cool as well. You know, I sometimes wonder if I had kept my cool, could I have done a point or two better? I don't think it would have helped me in the application cycle, but, you know, you had done, and 507 is already a very solid score. I mean, a lot of people don't get there.
Yeah.
But you kept your cool and jumped like 6 or 7 points. You know, that was insane. And something about, you know, Tall, right before we took it, he was pretty adamant about calming down the 2 weeks beforehand.
Yeah.
And I was not. My anxiety took over. And I was like, no, I have to memorize these 50 physics equations. I have to go over these 18 principles that, from biochem that I don't really know super well, that I couldn't teach about. And I was so obsessed, really, with this test. And it really does. It takes over your life the season that you go take it. But I think calming down the 2 weeks before you go do it, and especially the 2 days beforehand, don't do anything.
I won't give myself too much credit because part of my calming down was me saying, well, screw it. I'm not going to get above a 507. So I'm just not going to study anymore. I mean, in reality, I really didn't study much. I was studying like 2-3 hours a day, basically whenever we were together. It was the only time I was studying.
And he was dealing with me.
Because I was just working on my thesis, and I was saying like, well, I mean, I might as well do a really good thesis because there's no way I'm going to get a score good enough for med school. But maybe that's what helped. Maybe the calm down kind of really helped me. I definitely agree though that like the 2 days before, I wouldn't even take a practice test within a week.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So that brings up, so the 2 days before, I would really not, like, you either just chill and study, like be so calm while you're studying, or don't study at all. A good friend of mine, his dad graduated electrical engineering, 4.0, you know, really great test taker, all that stuff. Every single test, he would go out the day before and the morning of, and he would go fly fishing and not study while everyone else was cramming, and he graduated with a 4.0 in electrical engineering. I think there's something to that, really just calming down. And so for like the week before, some people will take like multiple practice tests leading up to the actual exam.
Like in succession, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 days apart. Oh
yeah. And they'll really crush themselves on like I need to be in the state of mind to be able to run through these questions and get everything really quickly, and I just need to be living the MCAT. I would highly advise against that for one very, very specific reason. The thing that helped me the most on test day, more than absolutely anything else, was that I was excited.
Yeah, we wanted to take it. We were walking around the parking lot before the building opened, and it was like cold, and and it kind of felt like the morning of game day.
Yeah.
You know,
you've been training for this.
Yeah, but we did have friends who took 2 or 3 of them in the week before. Like they were about to go take their test, and they were sitting there quickly grading one. And that's one thing that we can harp on. Yeah. Take twice as long to grade it than you did to take it. So
even take a couple of days.
Yeah, and get a group. Oh my goodness, get a group so that you can sit there and all debate on, you know, this question and how you mentally got there, especially with cars or something like that. Yeah. Just even between Tall and I, being able to sit there and say, oh, well, the reason it was this was because this one word right here is subjectively a little bit different. Or what's the C word for literature? Like connotation. Connotation. The connotation of this word, like it might seem like it means what they're trying to get at, but in this context, it's a little bit different, and that's why it's better. Yeah.
Yeah. So we both didn't take a practice test, and we thought we wanted to, or do like the Q banks. Do you remember those?
Yeah, right before. Oh God,
the Q banks were horrible.
I think that might be what ultimately led to my spiral the day of. Yeah. The week before the MCAT, we were staying up really late, and one of our friends had let us look at his Q banks from some site.
I have no idea where they were even from.
But they were really hard passages, and I crumbled. Like we did one Q bank, and it was like 100 questions, and I fell to pieces. I was like, I don't understand any of this. There's no way I can take it. I'm not prepared. I'll never be a doctor. Flash forward a week to the MCAT. Right. And yeah, so know yourself, know when you're doing enough, like go, trust your scores. You'll be surprised how consistent they are. Like Tall was saying, he had like 3 507s in a row, and then 1 508 on a good day, 1 506 on a slightly worse day. And so trust your scores, learn what's working for you, start early. The medical school headquarters, they have a great MCAT podcast, and they are starting one that is specifically for cars. Mm-hmm. So Next Step Test Prep is another free company. You can pay for one-on-one tutoring, but they have free diagnostic and a free full length. And then I would probably invest in like one set of books that comes with some practice tests just so you get used to taking it.
Right. And as far as what books are best, I mean, don't let anyone really convince you one way or another. Just read some good reviews, and if something stands out to you, go buy that one, or just buy the cheapest one. I mean, you just need the content. It's going to be the same in all the books. Especially if you can get them for free from a friend.
So almost all of our group has given their books away to people who are now in the process. I gave mine to a friend. Because when you are done with this and you have your score back, you are just so ready to get them out of your hands.
Yeah.
That if you've got a friend who's going through it, chances are they'll be okay with you, giving your books to them, however I said that. I think my friend traded some makeup. She was like teaching me how to use some makeup, and I gave her my MCAT books.
I had mine in a fire pit ready for like a cathartic rage of burning them. And then I really quickly just took a picture and I was like, hey, do you want these? And she was like, don't burn them. So yeah. I would say that my final word on the MCAT, especially like the week before, don't freak yourself out, because if you've gotten to the point where studying for it is kind of like a game, it's like your sport, it's your fun, you do not want to be burnt out before that test. Your best weapon, your secret weapon to getting a good grade on that test is being excited to read. That's day. Because you're reading so much throughout the entire test. You don't want to get bored halfway through and just not want to read anymore.
Yeah.
You want every bit of excitement that you can have to like really get interested in whatever the passage is.
And you could be like tall and really do great on test day. But if you are a typical pre-med and you happen to fall apart like I did, really once you get through it and you walk out of that testing center, I walked out and there were already tears falling down my face. Like I bawled in my car actually for about 30 minutes, probably before I could drive. Whatever you need to do after you take it, go do it. If you need to, I went and with Tal, we went and just walked around at a park nearby and just walked in the sunlight because I needed that to calm down. Or I had a friend who brought a bottle of champagne, and as soon as he finished his test, he walked outside and popped it in the parking lot and shared it with the people who had taken it that day. But be proud of yourself, because no matter what you did to prepare, that is a Goliath process. And we put so much into it, and I don't know, it's like you've almost taken your first step to becoming a doctor to get past that test.
So for us, it was April 21st, 2018, day after the MCAT. The dust is settling, and we have, 9 days, 10 days?
Yeah.
Until primaries. The application opened up like May 1st, I think. And we had about 30 to 35 days until we could submit our application. And obviously our MCAT score was going to come back around May 20th, a couple days before we would submit. So we had to pretty quickly turn towards primaries. Like, we're done with...
Immediately.
Yeah, pretty immediately. And please, if you take one word of advice from us on the primary, like that little... especially if you're someone who does the MCAT like we did it, like you get your score back before primaries even open up, and I would highly advise that. Then you want to take your time, really decompress from the MCAT, but you're not out of the woods.
No.
In fact, you just kind of entered the woods because they get thick real quick. And start working on your primaries. Start immediately. I would wait until probably May to send out requests for letters of recommendation.
No.
Or no?
I don't think you can ask too early. I've heard way too many stories of people who ask in January, but they tell the people these aren't due until June.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't submit this until June 1st or whatever.
Right.
To the professor, they don't have to give it to you until June 1st. Like,
Right.
that's what that sounds like.
Well, also, I mean, they have to give it to the application service, so it has to be
Beforehand.
open.
Yeah.
So maybe, I mean, if you're in a position to ask them, like, hey, I'm going to send you like a formal request.
Interfolio will be open before.
Oh, okay.
So there are certain application, I don't know what to call it, like a website that you can work with. I think you can use it for jobs as well. I think it's called Interfolio. Neither of us used it, but some people do. I think you have to pay to use it, a small fee. And because you cannot receive your letters of recommendation, you can have the people writing them for you send them to Interfolio, and they can hold them before the application cycle opens, or we sent them directly to the application.
But either way, most people, and it's kind of common courtesy and common procedure to say, like, give them at least a month.
Yeah.
And don't ever feel like it's you're being rude by kind of, like, be very cordial, really pick your words correctly. If it's been like a week and a half, 2 weeks, and you haven't heard anything, you haven't seen anything, just to bump, I always said, like, hey, Dr. So-and-so, just want to bump this email to make sure that, everything's still good. If you need me to even say, like, if you need me to clarify anything for the letter of rec, because you don't need to. They don't need anything clarified, but you're just letting them know. You're just giving a little nudge, like, hey, write my letter.
What you can do for them is send your resume, if you have a resume, or
Yes.
a CV. I went to lunch with a couple of my letter writers and just met with them in person. One thing I will say, make sure you ask them for a strong letter of recommendation. Some schools don't even consider them because, 99% of the people are going to have only positive letters of rec.
Yeah.
But if you can have some that stand out, that never hurts you, because you have no idea when they look at those letters in the process of, if they're evaluating your primaries, your secondaries, an interview, and a Casper test, and your letters of rec.
Yeah.
All of those things, it does not hurt to have one of them be extraordinary. So maybe you have a PI that can speak worlds about what you've done for his lab or something like that.
And I even had one of the members of my committee, she asked me, and I wish that I had done this preemptively with all the other people who wrote me letters, but she asked me, like, give me a paragraph talking about why you want to be a doctor, or give me a paragraph talking about, like, so I did my master's degree and she was on my thesis committee. So, like, maybe she could have asked, give me a paragraph talking about how your experience in the master's program is going to help you. So maybe even just do that without them asking. Just say, like, by the way, I just wanted to kind of give you, something about me that you might not have known from our experience together, that might help you. And you can, make sure it's something that doesn't sound fake, doesn't, like, they could validate the truth behind it. But maybe there's, like, a couple ways of wording things that they didn't know about you, that could really help them sound better, at least in the letter that they write.
So really quickly, let's run through the timeline.
Okay.
If you are, most pre-meds are a junior when they take the MCAT. So we would suggest that you start studying in January, because you'll learn what works for you and what doesn't. So just start early regardless. Purchase your books in December or something. Ask for them for Christmas or whatever if you're that big of a nerd. Prepare. Take your MCAT no later than March or April if possible.
Yeah.
Because applying late is the biggest mistake. We
Yeah.
cannot stress that enough. It is
Really.
the single thing that has been the most beneficial to us. So no later than April or March. So you'll get your scores back in May. At the beginning of May, I think, opens your primaries. So no matter what you do, you are going to underestimate how much goes into primaries.
Yeah.
So primaries open in May, and I was not very intelligent, and I started a very intensive volunteering program in May with an ESL place by my house, and I was loving it, and I taught in the mornings, and I was teaching at night, and I was like, oh, I'll just work on my primaries in between for a couple of hours every day. Ah ha ha ha. Little did I know how extensive, I mean, really, And so I did not get enough done, and I ended up, going out of the country on a trip with my family, right at the end when I needed to submit my primaries, and I had to do days, hours and hours and hours worth of work while I was on vacation with my family because I way underestimated the primaries.
And making sure that you do things correctly on the primaries.
Yes.
Because they're nitpicky about some stuff, and if your application like causes a fuss, then the med school might just put it over to the side, not throw you out, but they'll put you over to the side and just say like, we're not going to mess with that application until it's fixed.
Yep.
And who knows how long it'll take to get fixed, or who knows how many more people then just got right in front of you. And, it's...
And then it doesn't matter when you took your MCAT, you're late.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what Tal is talking about is you have to enter manually every class you have ever taken that is of college level. That includes an anatomy class in high school that you took. Every AP class you ever took, if you ever went to a community college, if you ever did a summer class somewhere else, you have to get transcripts in, from all of those schools. And then you have to manually enter how many hours that course was with the exact name. If you mess up the name at all, and you mess up more than like 3 to 6 credit hours worth of like a name, then even if it doesn't make sense, like the name is something weird that your administration just put in to like was a placeholder, you have to write that exact thing that's on your transcript down, or AMCAS can do what Tal was saying and set your application aside.
I remember in my master's degree, we had some classes that like it would just kind of be a topic class, like whatever the professor teaching it wanted to teach about, that was what the class was. But they just called it like advanced topics in molecular biochemistry, something like that. But basically what the class was named was ADV CONP or CONC, and then in MOLC, it was just abbreviations of that. That's exactly what you have to write, though. And
you want to write it out because you want them to know all the information. You want to be so open and helpful. And if you do anything that is kind of off what they want, you're like, that's done. And one of the things you have to do is input all of those classes in exact order. But how their website works, sometimes it will scramble the classes. Like the semester you took them will be correct, but they'll be out of order how you entered them. And I entered my entire transcript 4 separate times before they told me that sometimes the website will scramble.
Oh my God, you guys, please save and refresh.
Yes.
Constantly.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose, especially with your activities section, your hobbies, your extracurricular stuff, those essays. Save them on a Word doc, save them locally. Do not trust the website. That's what happened to me. It deleted like 5 of my essays for who knows what reason. But that's something you're going to learn about this whole process too, that pre-meds are so desperate that they will put up with anything in order for a school to like them.
Yeah.
Any service, like you'll put up with a lot. You might think that you have a spine. You don't. You'll put up with anything, and they know it.
So Tom mentioned extracurriculars. So transcripts, inputting all of your classes, your MCAT score, a bunch of your demographic information is one section. And then the last thing kind of is you have 15 spaces for extracurriculars.
Something like that.
So they want to see that maybe you played recreational soccer during college, or you were in a fraternity and you did a lot of volunteering, or you did the shadowing, or you were a scribe. And instead of just writing a job description, take that little paragraph that you have and kind of try to extract what you learned from it, or like how it led you to want to do medicine. But you don't have that much room. And remember, sometimes I feel like they don't even read them. I know that they do. Put some effort into them and have someone read over them. Don't make grammar mistakes or anything like that. But it almost doesn't, it's not the most important part of the primary. But it takes forever to write them.
It really does.
I mean, I wrote, even for my little rec soccer paragraph, I think I wrote it like 3 times.
You have to wordsmith like crazy.
Yeah, and so that kind of preps you for what it's like to write your secondaries.
But there's one other big thing.
Did I miss something?
That we're both glossing over. That was the coup de grace of wordsmithing, your
Which
personal
one?
statement.
Oh, I meant to talk about this for your letter of recommendation.
Yeah.
When Tal was talking about give them something other than just your CV and
Oh, yeah.
and your stats, which is basically, you know, as pre-meds, we are our stats.
Yeah.
Like we feel like that is what defines us as people. But what defines you as a person is why you want to go do medicine. And something that's really beautiful, I think, from this process is writing all those secondaries really and helps you narrow down why you want to do it. But you don't start thinking about it until you start writing your personal statement.
Yeah.
So when I just went over quickly that timeline, what I meant to mention was when you start studying for your MCAT, start writing your first draft of your personal statement. You will probably actually have closer to 10 to 15 drafts of your personal statement. Send it to a lot of people. Send it to any doctors that you know. Send it to your academic advisor. We had a friend that was phenomenal with helping us. Tal read mine and helped me a ton. You know, even just someone saying, hey, I think you meant this in one way, but it does not come off that way. Think about rewording this. Think about a different phrase here. Be careful with this wording.
It's funny, actually. The person who helped me the most with my essay doesn't even speak English as his first or second language.
That was the friend I was talking about. Yeah,
he's from Israel, and like the best thing about him. So obviously he knew how to write it enough. He knew the creativity side. He knew what it was supposed to look like. But the thing that was the best about him, and that would be the best about anybody reviewing your statement, is that you first off, you can't take it personally.
Yep.
You have to be brutally honest with every single word, even letters. You need someone to be brutally honest with you about, does this sound good? Does this sound bad? Do you need this? Do you not need this? He once told me, I had an entire paragraph. He said, like, you could probably write this in one sentence.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I probably could I? And sure enough, I actually got it down to one sentence. But oh, that was the best crafted sentence ever.
And I thought Tal was going to hate me after I read one of his first versions of a personal statement.
Yeah, but no, you even said, like, it sounds like you're trying to show off and, like, sound smart and all that stuff. And it really did. Looking back on it from like my final draft to my original draft, it was like I was trying to be like Walt Whitman writing a epic poem about like my failures and my successes and all that kind of stuff. And like, it didn't grab you. It just felt like you were reading my first draft. To me, kind of felt like you're just looking at like an impressionist painting or something. It's just kind of like you look at it and you like gloss off a feeling, but it's not like you're so I'm looking at Fleet Fox's first album. If anybody knows what that album cover looks like, it's like the medieval Renaissance whatever painting of a bunch of people doing stuff, and like that's what my final one looked like. You can see like, oh, that person is like shearing a sheep, and that person is like preaching to everybody on top of a thing, versus looking at like a milieu of color. You want very specific. You want them to know exactly what you're trying to say in your personal statement. Even be a little shocking. I know that the first thing I talked about was I had a very extensive history with my grandmother who had Alzheimer's, who had a bunch of other health complications. I had to move back home to help take care of her. You know, there were a lot of nights, and I kind of detailed one night in particular where you know, she was having, I think it was stomach pain. I can't remember exactly what was going on, but we had to call the ambulance. She was really short of breath. She was tachypnic, and she was having palpitations, and she was on the couch, and she was kind of sloughed off, and she said her back was hurting, but she had to really use the restroom, so I had to pick her up. And, you know, I wrote this like really moving, like, you know, like it was hard and I felt it, and I had been through this time and time again, and like, you know, I was challenging whether or not I wanted to be a doctor, but like I knew from the core of me that this was the most important thing, and I could see it in her eyes. And then she pooped on me. That was the end of the first paragraph of my personal statement, was, and then she pooped on me. And that was shocking. And I even had one interviewer tell me like, that was hilarious, and I immediately like remembered your personal statement when you came to this interview.
I think it's important to have like a little bit of humor,
yeah,
like sprinkled in, because these people read thousands and thousands of, I don't know how extensively each school reads your primaries, but they all read your personal statement.
They really do.
And
probably at interview. I mean, if I was to guess, they're not reading through it in the primary or even probably the secondary phase.
Sometimes you'll have like a partially open interview as well, where all they have is your personal statement. And I had one like that, one-on-one interview that was just my personal statement. So they are very important. And the friend that we were talking about kind of shared a similar story. He shared, I think they were hiking and they got lost and they had to have a rescue team come find them, but all he was thinking about was like Snickers bars or something like that.
I remember there was that like shocking, like kind of very dissociated thing that you're trying to piece it back together, but then at the very end he pieces it back together for you.
Yeah.
But you're engaged the whole time you're reading it.
There's an art to it, and it takes a long time to get to that point.
Very long time. Lots of revisions.
Months. It takes months. So what we're saying basically is we're, talking about primaries right now because it's part of the primary, but this part should start in January.
Yeah.
And I would say even ask your letter of rec writers in January. Like, let them know that you're coming to them with this, and maybe they can help you shape your personal statement.
And if all of this sounds overwhelming,
It's
because it is. It really is. Like you can't sugarcoat this. This is overwhelming and it's scary, and it's about to get even scarier because now you've submitted your primary application. You've got this lull, but you can't take a break.
Nope.
Once again, you need to get on Student Doctor Network. You need to get on the pre-med subreddit. You need to get on anywhere on the internet where they have archives of previous secondary questions, and you start writing those things.
Here is where we disagree with the experts on pre-writing secondaries, which if you are a with it pre-med, a woke pre-med, you've probably heard that you need to pre-write secondaries in that lull between submitting your primary early, if you've taken your MCAT when you should have, and when you start receiving secondaries.
It's probably about 3-4 weeks.
Right.
Something like that.
And you're exhausted because you just finished your MCAT and your primary sucked the life out of you.
Yeah.
And now you have to sit there and you're going to write probably 100 or more essays for an average to 15 to 20 schools.
Yeah.
And I think we had 23.
Yep.
So the experts say you need to pre-write the essays from all of the schools that you're going to apply to. Why that's crazy is that you can have 7 different versions from one year to the next where they only change one question.
Yeah.
So what we would advise is you're always going to have a diversity essay. You're always going to have tell me about a time that was challenging and how did you overcome that.
Maybe like working as a team.
Yeah, especially if that school is big on problem-based learning.
Yeah.
There are probably 10 to 15 major essays that you need to have written out before you start receiving your secondaries. But beyond that, they can change from year to year. And because you're so exhausted, I think if you just leave the pre-writing to those 10 to 15 major ones, because of the different word requirements and character requirements.
Gosh, that really throws a lot off.
Yeah, you're never going to be able to be prepared for all 23 schools or all 15 schools. So just pre-write those big ones and give yourself a little bit of a break. I mean, at this point, it's the summertime. Go on a trip or a little day trip or something and be proud of yourself. And remember that at this point, you are on the path to medical school and you need to start enjoying every little piece.
And it was really surprising to me when we were writing and when these secondaries were starting to come back, to realize how there were a couple questions that you really could like copy paste and kind of change a few words.
Yep.
But there were a lot, more than half, that maybe it was just the schools we applied to, but like they didn't overlap at all.
No.
So we ended up writing, I'm going to guess I wrote probably 30 unique essays.
Yep.
That were anywhere from 200 words to like a whole page, like 1,000 words or something like that.
Yep.
Maybe not quite 1,000 words, but close to that. And And you can sometimes copy paste a couple little things, but all in all with secondaries, there's no magic to it. There's no trick to it. You just have to sit down and really write. The one thing I would recommend, and we have reason to believe that this is a huge factor in interview decisions. Turn those things over fast. Don't give yourself time. Don't say like, okay, well, I got this. I got, sometimes we had like in one day, 4 schools send us secondary requests.
You get almost all of them within a 2-week period.
Yeah. You've got to turn them over like immediately, as soon as you can. And once you get one, immediately go to the website, start filling out all the stuff that they've got. Some schools have like tons of questions, and some of them are like, non-applicable if this doesn't apply to you. Don't be afraid to just write NA. Like, this thing doesn't really apply to me, so I'm not going to write about it. What they're going to care about are the important things, the impactful things that you write. So don't give them just a bunch of BS for the sake of having BS.
Like one of the questions I think was where on your application are there poor grades, or have you taken the MCAT multiple times, and how would you like to tell us like if something was going on that was out of your control? Maybe you lost a parent or a family member during that time, and there were extenuating circumstances. But I'd been really lucky all through my undergrad, and I had a 4.0 GPA, and I only took the MCAT once, and it went pretty well. So I just put NA in all of those schools. Yeah,
and if that's a good example of where someone might say like, well, this is a chance for me to just give it like one more little insight into me as a pre-med. So I could say like, well, even though my grades or whatever didn't reflect it, there was this time where I had to battle through this thing. Don't do that to them. They don't want to hear that. They just want to, like, I'm a good example. My early undergrad, I got a couple C's. I got mostly B's and some A's. And like, it didn't, I shouldn't say a couple. I shouldn't sell myself too short, but I had some. And it was something that they could have asked about or they would have wondered about. So like, that was good for me to do that. And then there were some other things where they say, it would be like little things, not the big essays, but like little essays that they would be asking you about, are there any
disadvantaged background or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good one where they say
we're both from a super privileged suburban.
Yeah. So we don't have that. So there's no reason to lie about it.
Right.
It's like, no, we don't have that, so just not applicable. That's probably the most consistent one. That's basically it for secondaries. I can't think of anything else that's important other than time to start waiting, and it's a scary wait.
So what I will say one more time, just to reiterate what Tal said, make sure you turn them around quickly. We heard someone say that you have 2 weeks to turn them around. Some schools will tell you if you don't respond within 2 weeks, we will take your name off consideration. We had a 2-day rule. If we could turn it around in 2 days, we were ecstatic because it takes a lot of effort. And people say like maybe have a teacher read what you've written, maybe have one other person, but you honestly don't have time for that. Maybe have one person that reviews your essays and make sure you're not saying something ridiculous or, crazy, and make sure you have no grammar mistakes. But what we did to keep it all straight was to keep an Excel spreadsheet. So I had a list of every school we applied to. Then I had a list of every school that gave me a secondary. And I had on that list when the exact date I received the secondary, and right next to it when I submitted it. And if there was a school that maybe was 4 days away from it being a week, or if I was close to a week of not returning one, but I had received 4 the day before, that one was going to get done first. So that it was as close as possible within, I think it ended up being a week was like an average. But there was only 1 or 2 schools that we returned, and it had been more than a week. It was like a week and 4 days or something like that, except for one school. That brings up another quick point. Make sure all your letters of that you have the correct letters of recommendation.
Read This Sucks once again, and people will say like, oh, that's so overwhelming. Sorry. It's the world we live in.
It's the process,
Go to the websites, read through everything on the websites of all these schools, make sure you've ticked all their boxes, because you never know when the schools are going to require Casper.
Oh, yeah,
and make you
Casper.
take something like that, or they want this specific letter of recommendation, or they're not going to consider you for admission, but you didn't give them that letter of recommendation, or especially if you're like a non-trad like me, and you might have different requirements for things.
Or it's been like 7 years since you've had a teacher that's a non-science teacher.
Right. So just suck it up, go through it. It's not gonna feel fun while you're doing it, but too bad. That's the way it is.
So this kind of makes sense to do at some point, maybe while you're studying for the MCAT. Make your list of schools, and really go off location and where you'd be okay living for the next 4 years. But I went school by school, every school we applied to, and wrote down the name, and then wrote down what their exact letter of recommendation requirements were. And most of them are between 3 to 5 letters. They will require, on average, this is what they require. Okay, so one physician, MD, DO schools would like you to have a DO, or at least to have shadowed a DO.
Yeah.
So one physician, one science teacher. Our problem was that a couple of schools required 2 science teachers. Maybe a research PI if you have one, or someone that you volunteered with. That's like a character reference. One science teacher, and
You said 2 science teachers.
oh, I'm sorry, one non-science teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's
then
a tough one.
Am I missing anything else? A physician, 2 non-science, like a lead, someone that was in charge of you, a non-science.
That's typically all I could see. Sometimes, especially if you're in a master's program, they want your PI or a committee member or the program director or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just make sure you read those websites.
Our school did not have a pre-med committee that will write you a committee letter, which is I think a big deal for a lot of schools.
Yeah.
But if your stats aren't high enough, sometimes the committee will not write you a letter. So you have to consider that as well.
Yeah.
But if your school does a committee letter, those requirements are different than if your school does not. So don't just have 5 people that are writing you a letter and then send it to every single school, because there are certain schools that only require 3, and they will not consider any more than 3.
Yeah.
So whoever sent in the first 3 is all they're going to read. Or maybe they require 6 and you don't have 6 in there, so you don't even get considered for an interview.
Yeah.
So we came across that problem pretty late into secondaries. We started, oh wait, we might not have all the requirements for our letters of recommendation.
Yeah. So I would recommend just get on it ahead of time.
Yeah.
I can't keep saying enough that the process just sucks.
Yeah.
There's so many little things to it, but you have to play the game. Don't fight it.
So we've gotten through secondaries. We're starting to receive interviews, but the one last hurdle that you may have that is coming down from our neighbors to the north is a kind of subjective, what do you call it? Situations.
Piece of crap.
Okay. A situation-based test on how you would handle basically what your professionalism level is.
Yeah.
So Casper,
the Casper test. It's a weird test. It's gonna run you probably somewhere around $100 total to send it to all the schools you need to. It seems to be really popular in the East and in the Southeast around where we are. So we were kind of out of luck with that. But Casper, they'll give you paragraphs or videos, and then they'll ask you a couple of just ethical questions about it.
Yep.
And you have 5 minutes to answer like 3 questions that need more than 5 minutes to be answered.
And you have to type it all out. It's not like it's a multiple choice. What would you do? You have
right.
to.
And I mean, I understand, it's like being a doctor. Something happens, you have to make a decision immediately.
Right.
But there is a biological difference between understanding something and then being able to type it in a written format to make sense grammatically in sentence structure versus, I'm in the ER, something happened, and I have to think and say like, okay, well, we'll do like this and then maybe blah, 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 and blah. But you get the point across verbally.
Right.
Versus trying to type it out, like 5 minutes goes by way too fast.
So they don't give you your score back, and the reason they don't is because schools look at it differently. Everyone considers it differently as part of they keep saying this word package. Your application package is made up of like 6 data pieces that they have, like your MCAT, GPA, Casper, primary, secondary, all of that stuff. So that you don't ever get your score back. So the best advice we could give you is just to go write it. They call it, the verb for taking it is just writing the Casper test. So just go make sure you comply with all their rules, and just get it over with. Do your best, make sure you're being respectful to other people, and you have those basic principles of like, you wouldn't decide to let somebody die or something crazy like that, but just show that you can handle situations professionally and just do your best.
Yeah. So I hated Casper. Most people probably hate Casper. We had one school at least tell us that it wasn't being used as like an actual factor yet. It was being used to try to verify like how good is this compared to MMI, which we'll talk about in a second. Basically, how valid is this test, and could this change the application process, even though right now it's not being used for the application process.
For that one school.
Right, for that one school, but other schools might already be using it,
and it might weigh in differently.
So I would say don't freak out about it. I mean, if you like it, then great, but I've never come across a person who liked that test.
And I took it in, I think, August. I think I took
late
it in
August
like mid to late August. And so I would say just get it out of the way early, because you can actually miss the deadline for certain schools.
Yeah.
Like some schools have a deadline. If you take it past October, you won't be considered because it's one of the requirements. Yeah. And you don't want to miss out on consideration from a school you've taken the time and money to apply to for something silly like missing a deadline.
So we took Casper. We received an incredible email that made us jump for joy that said, "You've been invited to interview at this school. We reviewed your application and it's favorable and you're real good. Here's a pat on the head. Now come interview with us." Interviewing is terrifying.
Oh dear God.
Your face will hurt from smiling so much afterwards.
Yes.
Your voice will hurt because you're just so excited to be there.
And you are slightly interested in going to such and such specialty, but you're really trying to keep your mind open.
Yes. You're very interested in innovating, but at the same time reaching out to rural and underserved populations. You've also just always wanted to just reach the inner city needs. And you also want to travel the globe and really get into global outreach.
But if you're at your state school, you really care about reaching the underserved population in your state.
Absolutely. And with those underserved populations, you want to provide primary care, but at the same time, do ophthalmological surgery or even dermatology on them. You just want to be like, ultimate doctor.
Yeah, and then you're also like super excited about some stem cell research.
So that about wraps up interviews.
And we're kind of joking about what all
the stereotypes.
Yeah, everything you feel you need to say in an interview. And quickly, it reminds me of a lot of your secondaries are actually interview questions that you end up hearing.
Yeah.
So when you're answering your secondaries and when you're answering your interview questions, don't just say what you think they want to hear, like everything we just spit out, because you and every other pre-med that walks in that door that day is going to very earnestly and honestly be trying to convey that they care about all of those things we just mentioned. Pick one or two of the things that are really important to you. For example, I had 3 years, because my undergrad was 3 years of really intensive biochemistry research. I spent every waking moment in my lab. And I had over 3,000 hours of like stem cell research. And in my gap year, I'm working as an ESL teacher, and I'm doing work with a cardiologist and working in a Hispanic clinic. And that has become something of a giant passion of mine. And in my interviews thus far, even though my interviewers have known about all of that research experience, the only thing we've talked about is cultural competency in medicine and my passions for reaching an underserved population, So I did the XYZ required for medical school, but what has become a passion of mine and what writing secondaries really helped me figure out was what was important enough to drive me to do this as a career.
It's your story.
Yeah.
We were actually talking about that earlier too, before we started recording, that that knowing your story, knowing your narrative is so important, and stick to that. Like, don't lie to them. Don't, I don't have any kind of reason to say that I'm very passionate about reaching out to underserved populations or like a global outreach kind of thing. And I don't. It's not that I wouldn't want to or that I'm against it or anything, but
Right.
I don't have anything to show that I can do that. So I'm not going to lie to them and try to just dilute my application by saying that. I'll try to make it, if they really want to know, I'll make it fit into my narrative, but I'm not going to change my narrative for anybody because they can tell.
Yeah, and when I was writing these secondaries and realizing that this is actually a big passion of mine, I could actually look back in my undergrad and see that freshman year I had joined a global studies program in the honors college, and we had gone to Costa Rica and Italy, and then later I had studied in Mexico, and these things had been kind of threaded through my undergrad, and then boom, in my gap year I kind of fell into these jobs, and it's really influenced what I want to do in medicine. But that narrative all came together, and I was not pulling things out of the air. You know, they had been a part of my story, and they were already present. And maybe you do need a gap year to figure that out.
I mean, I think so. I think gap years are important for that. And just chilling out. We've already heard one of our friends just recently said, I really wish I had done a gap year, even though he's in medical school.
Yep.
But yeah, so I mean, if it's too late and you're listening to this, then figure out the best narrative you can. If it's early enough, then really think about your story, because that's going to help you so much. And you're not going to know how much it's going to help you until you're sitting in the chair across from the person and they say, why do you it's a plastic surgeon and they're like the dean of this school and this, and they did all this stuff, and they look at you and say, why do you want to be a doctor? And they can smell BS from a mile away. Don't try to fool them. Let them know exactly what's up, and don't lie to them. That was something I really thought when we were like preparing for interviews. Before I had gone to my first interview, I thought, like, I'm going to have to lie a lot. I'm going to have to put up a show. Or maybe not lie, but, like, not be true to myself.
Portray that maybe I know more about medical ethics, even though I've never taken a medical ethics class, and I've not been in the hospital enough to know how to handle situations like that.
Right. So I couldn't stress enough, be really honest with them. Don't try to beat around the bush. They want to see that you're a normal person, you're a logical, real person, that you don't think you know all the answers, that you're willing to learn. A big thing for me that I brought up in a lot of my interviews was curiosity. That's the most important aspect to me, I think, because curiosity doesn't die as quickly as passion could, just by like one really big upset. So, I talked about that. And if I was ever questioned and they would say like, well, is that really the most important thing in a student? I would say, yeah, I really think it is. I wouldn't back down. I would stick to my guns and just be confident and say, like, but always be cordial and everything, but treat it almost like when you're going into the interview, everything you're saying is correct, and they're going to try to steer you off that path.
Yeah.
But you know who you are and you know what you feel. Don't be arrogant or anything like that, but like you're passionate about what you do and what you know and how you think, and stick to it, because that's confidence.
The biggest thing that, Dr. Ryan Gray, who is one of my favorite, he's almost like a mentor, but I've never met him.
Is your boyfriend?
No. Okay. I don't think Allison would appreciate that. Oh, Allison Gray, if you're listening, I love you to pieces. She is his wonderful wife, and I love how she thinks about medicine and other people, and it's just awesome.
Oh, please go on.
Anyway, one of the things that Dr. Ryan always says is, like, when he's preparing students for interviews and writing secondaries, is exactly what Tal is saying: know yourself. Because even if you have no idea what's going on with the situation that you've been given in an MMI or in whatever secondary essay, you can pull from experiences that you've had and really stick to what you're saying. Because if you say one thing at the beginning of their question and they poke you enough to make you change your decision. I had one MMI station, my very first interview, where she was asking me, I don't think I can talk about the question, I don't think I'm allowed to, but she asked me, like, was it better to do X or Y? And I picked the obvious one that most pre-meds would pick that one, but my reasons for it were different. And my reasons for it were because of how I learned specifically, and I was able to talk to her about that. And then she kept poking me with probably 4 or 5 follow-up questions. And by the end, I could very easily see that a lot of pre-meds would have flip-flopped their answer.
Yeah.
But I stuck with mine, and I was able to because how I had answered it was because of how I learned.
Yeah.
And I can't, I couldn't change, oh, just kidding, I only learned that way for, certain, days of the week or something like that. But if you know yourself, you can always pull from, and it's almost like a calming thing. Like, you never have to be 100% prepared because you never will be.
Yeah. So we keep talking about MMI. So we'll start with just traditional. Everyone kind of understands what a traditional interview is. They're going to sit you down. They've got your file. They probably have a couple questions of specific things from your file that they're curious about or that they're going to probe you about. They might be hostile. They might be really nice. They might just let you go. I had one like traditional interview where she probably asked me like 2 questions in the span of 25 minutes. And I just kept talking. And like, I'm a person that I need like a conversation to me is very like back and forth. And I want to be interrupted, and then I want to interrupt, and like, let's just keep hammering this thing out until
you tell that he's a podcaster?
Until we finally get there. But she just let me keep talking, and she was smiling, and she was nice, and she was cordial, but she would just let me keep talking. And I started like second guessing myself and thinking like, oh God, I'm being rude. Am I being rude? Like, well, and I would back up a little bit. Probably wasn't my best performance in a traditional interview, but anyway, getting off topic. So, traditional interviews, pretty cut and dry. It's going to take a lot to really like workshop your answers.
Yeah.
But as long as you, once again, know your story, know your timeline, be able to go down your timeline, find when something happened, talk about it, and then know how it relates back to the next thing that happened or a later thing that happened, to get to who you are. Most questions will be based off that. Some questions could be hypotheticals, blah, blah, blah. Typical interview stuff.
Yeah.
MMI is a new craze that's sweeping the nation. And once again, I think from our neighbors to the north, they're the McMaster?
Yeah, McMaster University in Canada. And the creators really actually, it's really scary for those of us that have never done one before. But at this point, I've done 3 of them. I think you've done a couple of them too. They are actually kind of fun.
Yeah.
And the creators made them because you have about 9 stations.
Yeah.
So that it takes away some bias in case maybe, traditionally you'd have one person or maybe 2 people. And if you didn't hit it off with one of them, your entire acceptance to medical school was hinging on that one person.
Yeah.
So do you want to define what it is?
Yeah. So when you go into MMI, you're going to, maybe have your back to the door, or maybe there's like a clipboard or a piece of paper that's turned away, and then like they'll ring a bell or something, and you have about 2 minutes to read the prompt. It's going to be some kind of ethical question, or like, remember a time that you faced some kind of struggle and how did you overcome it? Or how would you recommend someone work in a team, or whatever? It's questions like that. Or it could be like a situation, you're like you're in charge of these people and they're doing X, Y, and Z. How would you handle the situation? And the important thing, like you mentioned earlier, you said it could go X or it could go Y. So if you have an X and a Y and maybe even a Z, and you think, well, X is what I would do. Stick to it. Don't waver, but do not neglect Y and Z.
Right.
Because you have to understand that it might be more complicated than you think. And you have to, if not in your initial answer, they might probe you and say, well, did you think about this? And then you might say like, well, yeah, that's a good point, because actually you might, play devil's advocate, see where the other side is, see where Y and Z could be coming from, talk about them, but then ultimately, explain how you still stick with your original decision. And that's most of what MMI is. And you got 7 or 8 minutes.
Yeah, so I've had ones that are 6, I've had ones that are 8, and people are typically terrified when they find out they have an MMI.
Yeah.
And then they leave the stations, their last one, smiling, because you really do get to have just just view it as a conversation with a member of either, it might be the community, they may be a doctor. They just want to see that you can communicate with people of all different kinds, and just be a person. But what Tal was saying about stick to what you're saying, they really will. They'll have follow-up questions that maybe you haven't thought of before. So if you only stick to decision X, you have blocked yourself off from even considering Y and Z. But then make sure that a lot of it happens with ethical questions. So you could say, no, it's never okay to do whatever they're asking you about. And then they're like, okay, but what if?
Yeah.
And then if you haven't considered that possibility, so maybe the way to approach it is, I can't think of a time when it would ever be okay to do blah, 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 because it reminds me of integrity. And I think to do that might be violating the integrity of what medicine is. And I don't think that that's okay.
And it could even be if it's something where, like, I had one I remember where it was something that was like very obviously not okay to do. And I still tried to say, like, you know, I tried to be forgiving, and I tried to say, like, I mean, I could see why they would do this, because, you know, it's tough when you're in the ER or whatever, and you have this situation come up, and you have to make the quick decision, and you've got patients backing up. I could see why they would do this. You know, it makes sense. It's a fault, but it makes sense. However, I have to stick to this answer because of X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So always be cordial, always be understanding, but like you said, stick to your guns.
So stick to your guns, and then when they do have those probing follow-up questions, do not let them see you unravel.
Yeah.
So if you have worked yourself into a corner, which you might do just because it's a conversation and they're asking you questions that really seem black and white sometimes at the beginning before they ask those, you know, gray area questions, which is probably the perfect analogy where you might need to consider option Y and Z. Don't let them see you panic and pause and go, oh God, it's all coming apart. There's no way I can save this. Even if you completely fail one station, you've got 6 more.
Yeah. And sometimes they'll take away like your worst and your best score.
Yeah.
And then they'll average out the rest to see like how well did you do. Because they do score you. There's a scoring system.
I think it's up to 9 points. No, that's Casper's up to 9 points. I don't know how they score MMI.
But you get some kind of quantitative score from it. And then they also take notes.
Yes.
And like I had a lady one time who was taking notes, and she wouldn't say anything, but whenever I would make some kind of point, she would look up at me and like look like, oh really? And then look back at her notes, but she wouldn't say anything. She would just have the eyebrows like, and then look back at her notes, and I was like, what do you mean? What did I say? And
so they've also, some of them have been coached to be like even slightly combative or just completely silent.
I hated the silent ones.
One station I had was to interact with another student. There's, if you just Google basic MMI scenarios or different possibilities, in Canada, it's really popular for them to have like acting MMI scenarios where you walk in and you are the doctor and you have to address the patient. And so I had another applicant tell me that she had done one of those already here in the U.S. So I'm trying to think. One other type of interview would be a group interview. I've only had one of these. But it was interesting. So it was 3 interviewers and then 3 of us applicants. And yeah, it was weird because you're not really interacting in that situation with the other applicants. But what you say is being listened to by other people, and you're basically trying to, you know, it feels like you're trying to compete, but you're not. I don't know. Sometimes you're asked the same question, so it's hard to say something that sounds different than the 2 people preceding you who also care about other people and have done research. And you know, but you all have different stories. So in whatever interview situation you're given, be able to talk about your story, stick to what you're saying, be a respectful, good human.
Yeah.
You know, and don't panic.
Yeah.
Because I have seen someone unravel. In fact, the group interview, I saw somebody unravel. He was in my team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want... confidence is huge.
Yeah.
You need to be confident to be a doctor. Like, even if you don't know what you're talking about, as a doctor, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're unsure, you got to tell the patient something. And you have to... Well, no, I mean, it's so small just made a face at me. So if you're a doctor and you're unsure about something, like let's just say the patient presents with these symptoms, it's horrible, and you're not totally sure what's wrong with them. Do you go up with like a scared face and be like, "Oh gosh, like we got your tests back and we don't know what's wrong with you"? Or do you just
No.
very confidently look at them and say like, well, we got these tests back. It's it's a little unusual. We're gonna consult with these docs and blah blah blah.
Yes.
Even though behind the scenes you might think like, wow, this person might die.
Yeah. Oh no.
They might be on death's door. But no, you want to approach it with confidence. You don't want to be like kind of taken back. You don't want your eyes to dart around. You don't want to like furrow your brow or anything like that. You just want to keep smiling and like just be like, glad you brought that up, and then start talking about that and just be confident.
I will say that you can definitely look pensive. Like, it's okay if your smile fades if you're talking about something really serious. Like, if someone is considering suicide and they're talking, like, maybe your scenario is about that.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to smile like a Barbie the whole time you're
Right,
answering
right.
that question. But what he's saying about not letting them see any kind of worry or, like, panic on your eyes, the day of my like worst interview, the day I think I performed the worst, I paused, way too long between when I was thinking. Like, I started before I was ready to start my answer.
Yeah.
Instead of saying like, all right, well, give me one moment just to kind of tie up what I'm trying to say. I just started, and then my trail kind of fell off, and then I think they could tell. And then with follow-up questions, I just was not answering like I wanted to, and it was even the questions that was like right down my alley of what I was passionate about, I was disheveled from the previous questions that I had done poorly on.
Yeah.
And I had done 2 MMIs before that, so I should have been able to just overcome it, but it just wasn't my day. And so the questions that I should have knocked out of the park, I just didn't.
Yeah.
And I think you probably will have at least one bad interview. Sometimes they say it's just your first one because you're just learning how to do this. One piece quickly of advice that I would give is when you're walking into a room, do the 2 knocks like you're walking into a room to see a patient.
Yep.
And I would say enter the room with a smile as if you are the doc and you're expecting to see a patient. Thinking about it that way helped me get into the mindset of I need to be positive, or at least kind of cheerful and okay to be around when I'm talking to this person. And also I need to be professional because I'm acting as if this is my job.
Yeah. So I guess my last word of advice on it would be to be memorable, because if everyone says the right thing, they're going to remember that, like, well, all these candidates were really good, but that's the guy that talked about X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
So be memorable. That's one of the common threads that I would say to anybody for any interview.
And if your interview ends up, there was an applicant with me who had interviewed at already like 5 or 6 schools, and it was like one of the very first interview days of the season. He was saying that at the end of his interview, he had just ended up talking about, and he had a one-on-one. So traditionally, those traditional interviews are long, like 25 minutes or 20 minutes. At the end of his whole traditional interview, almost the entire time they had talked about food.
Yeah.
And that's how he's going to be remembered. Like, oh yeah, he had a 4.0 GPA and a 528 MCAT, and he was phenomenally talented, and he does outreach and research, and oh yeah, but he makes a phenomenal pizza, and we talked about how he can make it from scratch, and he traveled to Italy and did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So know yourself, be confident, go like with the flow of the conversation, like Kev said.
Yeah. Really, yeah. Don't feel like there's a stop and there's a start, or there's any one particular thing you have to talk about. Just be friends with the person and be memorable. Do something cool. Do something different. Something they wouldn't expect, or bring something up. Like, I know in one of my one-on-ones, I started interviewing the other guy.
Yeah.
Because he said like, he said like, so why do you want to be a doctor? And I kind of laughed, and I brought up something, and it was like the right moment for me to say like, well, I guess I could ask you the same question. Why do you still want to be a doctor?
Yeah.
And then he started answering me, and then I started asking him like a couple other questions, and he remembered, and he was like, that was fun. And so yeah, just do that little thing.
And the process, I've heard someone say one time before that if pre-meds knew everything that went into this getting here, getting into a school, there's no way that they would ever go through this, because there's always one more thing you have to do. There's always one more thing you have to fill out, one more test to take, one more requirement you didn't know that there was.
Yeah.
And so you almost have to have a little bit of blindness, because when you're going through the MCAT, it's like all you can do to focus on that. And then if you knew everything that went into primaries and secondaries, you'd walk away.
Yeah.
You'd go work at McDonald's the rest of your life, So go into it with some patience too, because this is a long process and you're going to have to wait the whole year maybe. Like the first round of interviews, you can hear back at, my first one was in August.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I got in until October.
Yeah.
And then some people won't find out until literally the day before classes start. The next cycle year.
So this brings us to where we are right now. Mm-hmm. We have, as far as like the first kind of round of interviews goes, we're there. We've done them. We have a couple schools, and we're going to hear back hopefully on like October 16th, which is in about 2 weeks.
Yep.
And then maybe we'll start hearing from some other schools. I think you can hear back on like October 16th, December 16th, February 16th, and March or April.
They do like March, I think, and then May.
Okay.
They really break it up into quarters, and you typically, the reason we stressed applying so early is that you have more seats open at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're a phenomenal candidate, you kind of get lost in the brush if you're applying late in the cycle, because you're there with everybody else that wasn't impressive enough to come in for an interview at the beginning.
Right. You want to stick out in the beginning. I know that both of us, we felt kind of like intimidated by the credentials of the other people who interviewed with us.
Oh yeah.
And like we're not unimpressive people by any stretch, but like the people that we were with, holy crap, like they're like Ivy Leagues all over the place. And I did all of this crazy, incredible research, and I toured the world doing this. And I've already worked as like a paramedic or a nurse for this long. And,
Yep.
It's intimidating to see those people. But the thing that I came to realize, and you've come to realize, is there's a reason that we're there. Part of it is that we care enough. And the other part is that like once you're at the interview, you're just as good as all these other people on paper. That's the past.
Exactly. And it's kind of a beautiful path too. Once you can retrospectively look at it, I mean, it stinks sometimes when you're in it, but having to go through this whole process and even writing your secondaries really leads you to, and your personal statement, create this story of who you are, this narrative, to weave this narrative. And it's not like you're creating it. You're just picking out, oh my goodness, there's been this whole path to get me where I am now. And it's been fun to come talk about that at the interviews.
Yeah. That's also the terrifying thing about the interviews, is that once you're done with the interview, all these years of you doing all of this work, all of a sudden you have this giant package that is you, the pre-med you.
Yep.
And now it's gone.
It's out of your hands.
You drop it. And you hope that it lands on an acceptance.
Yes.
So on these dates, these deadline dates or whatever, you'll hear about acceptances, denials, or wait lists. Obviously, acceptance is acceptance, and you can hold an acceptance by like giving a school $100.
Mm-hmm. And you have to let them know within 2 weeks, I think it is.
Mm-hmm, of them initially telling you. And then you can hold it for a long time. And the reason, obviously, that you would want to potentially hold one acceptance is you don't know how the rest of the application cycle is going to pan out.
Right.
With that said, they do put restrictions on you. I think they limit it to 3 schools.
By April 15th, you have to choose 3 schools.
So 3 schools that you can do this hold on. And then by April 30th, you have to choose.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you can either choose like, okay, I've got these 3 schools, I'm going to choose this one. So you'll get refunds from the other schools. And then the $100 for that one school will just go towards your tuition. So, you're not losing any money doing this. But the trick is, if let's just say you're waitlisted at this really, really great school that you would love to go to, and then there was another school that you're kind of settling for, but you got into it. On April 30th, you have to either tell that school the bird in the hand, you have to either let it go and say, I'm going to pin my hopes on the school I got a wait list on, because they can still, like you said, they can let you in up to the day before classes start. So they have the upper hand.
Yeah, there's a school that actually gives a scholarship to the student that is accepted as the very last seat in his class.
Yeah.
Which we thought was funny.
Yeah, so my recommendation, if you got the bird in the hand, take the bird in the hand, guys. I don't know if anybody would actually like just pin their hopes on the wait list, because I just love this school so much. Screw that. Throw all that in the garbage. You get into a school, go to the school. Don't throw away your bird in the hand for two in the bush.
What story I love about that is I always talk about them from the medical school headquarters, but Dr. Ryan was going to New York Medical College and deferred a year, and then Dr. Allison, his wife, I think had a bird in the hand school that was like one of her dream schools. And I think she was like on the wait list and, you know, probably pretty high up. But the thing is, no school will tell you your location on the wait list.
Yeah.
So that is, you really don't know if you're safe or not. So what he's saying, really take the bird in the hand. And she did. She took New York Medical because she had an acceptance. I think maybe she had multiple, but she ended up deciding on that school. And then it was the perfect thing for her. It was a great school for her, and that's where she met Ryan. And then they have this great family and this great company. And, you know, I think wherever we end up is going to be the right school for us. I don't think you can go to a bad medical school.
Yeah, you really can't. And don't ever feel like anyone says, oh, well, you need to go to this good school because then you'll get into these residencies. Like,
right.
Stop that pre-med nonsense, because that's the way that we've thought for the past couple of years. We're done. We're in med school. We're going to be doctors. Like, be happy with that.
Yeah, view your peers as your colleagues.
Yeah, finally be content.
Right.
You get into a school, go to that school. Only apply to schools that you would actually want to be at the location and the school and all that kind of stuff. And once you do that, it doesn't matter. You just get in somewhere and you're good. And with all of this said, waitlist isn't, you mentioned it really, that you don't know where your position is on the waitlist.
Right.
You could be, let's just say that the school is going to accept people in like 50 person chunks. And you are like number 51. So after the first round, you get put on the wait list. You think like, oh gosh, there's no way I'm done. But then let's just say that the rest of the people who interview, they're all underneath 51. Then when that second round of acceptances comes out, you're the first person they send an acceptance to.
Right.
So it's not the end of the world.
And when you go on interviews, you really need to take it seriously. So be calm, you know, the whole time. Don't be panicking. You're like, oh no, my future depends on this. You are interviewing that school as much as they are interviewing you. You'll walk around, you'll tour the campus, you'll talk to current students. You need to make sure that you could be happy there and you could be okay in that location.
Yeah.
And it is okay if you do not mesh with that program.
Yeah.
You don't have to mesh with all of those programs.
Yeah,
it stinks if that's the only school you get an acceptance to.
Right.
But typically, if it's a good fit for you, they will like you just as much as you like them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to keep in mind is that schools bring in probably about 600 people. If their class size is about 180 or 200, they'll interview like 3 times as many people-ish. So you're not competing against everybody that's interviewing with you.
You've made it really far.
Yeah.
If you get an interview. Congratulations.
Because they're starting with 5,000, right?
Yeah,
5,000 applications. And any number of you from that interview day can go through.
Yeah.
So you will be able to, really get a feel for that school. You really do. One day is all you need. And take advantage of the opportunity to talk to the current students.
Yep.
So one last thing for me is if you have the opportunity and you're taking a gap year, it has been the most important thing for me to have a flexible job schedule.
Yes.
Because I feel at this point that I feel like I'm professionally interviewing. Like I've only been to 4 so far, but it's the first quarter of interview season and I've had 7 interviews. So I'm every week going on at least one, and I've driven to all of them. So I need at least 1 day of travel beforehand. So being able to tell my boss, hey, I can only work these 3 days of the week and I can come in on Saturday if you need me, or, being able to have a flexible schedule has saved me.
Yeah.
And has given me exponentially more ability to go see those schools. Because if I was working and I couldn't go, sometimes they don't give you another option. Like sometimes you get to pick your interview day, but other schools will not let you.
Yeah. And they're you don't show up if you don't. it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, you need to set 3 alarms. And I remember the night before one of mine, I called like 5 people to say, can you call me in the morning to wake me up?
Yep. Get a wake up call from your hotel. I set like on the one school, I was excited about all of them, but there was one school that I was super excited about. And I set like 7 alarms. And then I had the hotel call me.
Yeah. So that's where we are. That's
Yeah.
where we've been. That's what we've been doing. All of you hordes of devoted Tall and Small fans.
I think we have maybe 1 view on one of our videos.
It's pretty good. It's a start. You got to start somewhere.
You do.
So where are we going to go with Tall and Small? So obviously we were sorry that we've taken so long. We wanted to honestly have enough content out by this point that we could start even like thinking about trying to have like an actual following.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, professionally kind of thing, like they would do on the pre-med years or something like that. But, you know, it would be cool to actually have a voice in this. And, you know, we're good enough at it and we have enough of a drive at it. And the podcast kind of content world is so easy to just jump into and start putting out content and see if people like what you do. But the next thing that we're going to be doing, which we've already done a little bit of work on and we'll be shortly releasing to this channel, is going to be an anatomy podcast. An anatomy, possibly some physiology, but anatomy, like stories, injuries, pathologies, and just general anatomy podcast. And so the reason this podcast is the thing is because of the title. 50 Days of Grey's. We will be going through Grey's Anatomy in 50 episodes, hopefully before we start med school, God willing. And I will be hosting that and putting a lot of work into that.
And Small will be co-hosting.
Small will be co-hosting.
But mostly asking cool questions.
Yes, asking all the questions that all of you want to know. And I'm excited to dive into that.
I am too.
It's gonna be sexy. It's 50 Days of Grey's.
We have some pretty cool music.
I'm pretty sexy.
Okay, Tall.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I'm still trying to get like a groove for it in general, but it's coming along well, and we're going to be releasing those very soon. Since now we're back on the scene, we really wanted to be well prepared as we came back onto this, because I want this to be a project that we actually stick to, and because this is so much fun and it's valuable for talking skills, for confidence, for being able to think quickly, being able to talk to someone while you're thinking about something else. Yeah. And so Small, you also have a thing brewing up in the mix that I will be co-hosting.
Yes. And quickly, we may finish with a couple of psych videos, since I prepared so much more material than we actually created. But they will be much shorter. Like we said, it's the MCAT is a mile wide and an inch deep. So we'll just be doing quick videos, main idea stuff, and then you can self-study from there if you want to. Just kind of tie that up with a nice neat bow, so we don't feel like we left anybody in the dark, if maybe one of you has listened to some of them. But the new thing that maybe I will be hosting is, we thought it would be interesting to do a podcast on medical ethics.
Yeah.
Because I have no background in it. I never took a class in it, but it's immensely interesting to me. And I thought maybe we could take cool stories and just talk about what we would have done, and then look at maybe legally what they were supposed to have done, or I know what somebody suggests that they should have done so that they didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And talk about things that are important to really giving compassionate care and competent care, and we thought that would be fun.
And I'm going to play the dummy role on that show, and I'm going to come in completely layman and just curious.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to ask the questions for y'all. I'm going to do you proud.
And this is all under a title of...
What, Tall and Small?
The bigger title of...
I don't know.
Hippocrates?
Oh, Hippocrates. So Hippocrates is potentially what I'm going to call like kind of the banner of this. I'm also doing a show that I've started prepping for with another buddy of mine. that we're throwing around titles right now. I'm hard pushing one title in particular, but so the little insight into me, I guess. I do a lot of running. I do a lot of long distance running, and a buddy of mine wants to have like a real formative change in his life, and he wants to try to run the John Muir Trail with me. We're going to do it in 7 days, and it's one more day than I think we need, but we're going to try to run all 211 miles of the John Muir Trail in 7 days, and we're going to document his journey and all of his injuries and all of his training and all of that, which will actually that'll dovetail nice off of 50 Days of Graze.
Yeah.
Diving into the anatomy, and I'm going to be teaching him, he's a true layman to the medical world, about training and about like his form and his metabolism and all of that, up to the point where we are going to run the trail and see how it goes. It's another show that's all coming under the banner of Hippocrates, which I might have to secure that .com soon. It's got such a sweet logo.
So I, as small, will be jumping on as a co-host to a couple of Tall's projects, but this is really Tall's baby, and I'm very proud of him. He's very good at it.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm excited to see what he comes up with. But other than possibly hosting one of my own, and maybe if we find something in the future, I'll probably just be secondary. But I'm excited to be involved.
Yeah, there's no limit to this stuff other than your own creativity and your own curiosity. You don't have to be an expert on this stuff. You just gotta want to know.
Yeah.
Do a little bit of research and then hammer out truth. It'll eventually happen. That's the beauty of these kind of things. You get really long-lasting knowledge and truth just by slowly chipping away at everything you can, and forcing yourself to know enough and think about it hard enough that you can just talk about it.
We talked about at one point possibly having one where we just talk to other pre-meds about their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we'll go into that, since we're maybe out of the woods with this section of our medical lives. But somebody should make one about it.
Yeah. That's you out there.
Yeah.
That one guy listening to us. We know you're there.
And we have a fan.
Thanks.
It might
Thanks.
that might be our email. We don't know.
I'm just going to keep on pretending it's someone else. Well, I think that about does it. We've talked your ears off enough, but I don't even remember how we sign off. I remember how the old sign off worked, but I mean, we need a new sign off.
We do. We need one for 50 days for sure.
Yeah. So what is this? Is this kind of like a wrap up of Strong Work Gang? I mean, what are we doing here?
May the force be with you.
That worked.
Okay.